The phone call came at 4:17 on a Tuesday afternoon in November. I was standing at the island in our kitchen, wrapping leftover roasted chicken in foil. The forensic accountant my attorney had hired 3 months earlier had been a woman named Petra Voigt. I had only met her once in my attorney's office at the start of the case, and she had shaken my hand and said, "I do not need to talk to you again unless I find something. If I find something, I will call." She had not called for 3 months. The phone rang. I saw her name on the screen. I set the foil down. I picked up the phone. I said, "Petra." She said, "Brynn, I found something. I found something that I do not think is going to be small. I would like you to come to my office tomorrow morning. I would like Lucinda to come too. I am going to walk you through it. Bring a notebook. Bring tea if you drink tea. This is going to take about 3 hours. I said, "Petra, tell me one thing. Was my husband acting alone?" She paused for a long second. Then she said, "Brynn, no, he was not." I said, "His mother?" She said, "Yes." I said, "Thank you, Petra. I will be there at 9." Welcome back to Broken Relations Stories. If you are new here, this channel is for the women whose mothers-in-law have spent decades pretending to be on their side. The women who finally got the proof. Drop a comment, hit subscribe, tell me where you are watching from, and let me take you back to my wedding day, which was September of 2008, when I was 28 years old, and my future mother-in-law stood beside me in the bridal suite and adjusted my veil and said something to me that I did not understand for 16 years. My name is Brynn Caraway. I am 44 years old. I have been married to a man named Holden Caraway for 16 years. He is 47. He is the chief operating officer of a small manufacturing company his father founded in 1979 in a small city in the upper Midwest, and which Holden inherited a 60% stake in when his father died in 2014. The other 40% went to his mother, Patrice. Patrice is 76 years old. She is, by every external measure, a charming woman. She volunteers at the Historical Society. She is on the board of the local hospital auxiliary. She wears soft cashmere cardigans and pearl earrings and has her hair set at the same salon every Friday morning at 10. She has been, for 16 years, the kind of mother-in-law who sends thank you notes the day after Thanksgiving and remembers all the birthdays of all the grandchildren, of which there are 7, 2 of which are mine. Patrice has been, for 16 years, the kind of mother-in-law who other women have envied me for. I have heard it at parties. I have heard it at school events. "Brynn, you are so lucky. Patrice is wonderful." I have nodded. I have said, "I know. I am lucky." I have said it for 16 years. I want to tell you what it cost me to stop saying it. I should tell you about Patrice's other daughters-in-law because they are part of this story. Holden has 2 brothers. Sutton, who is 49, married to a woman named Felicity, and Beckett, who is 44, married to a woman named Wren. I had been the 3rd daughter-in-law to enter the Caraway family. Felicity had come first in 1999. Wren had come in 2014. The three of us had spent 10 to 16 years respectively trying to figure out what our shared mother-in-law actually thought of us. We had compared notes occasionally the way women do at Christmas gatherings and summer barbecues. We had each noticed separately that Patrice had a way of complimenting us in front of other people that did not quite reach our eyes. We had each noticed that she had a way of mentioning our husband's previous girlfriends when we were within earshot. We had each noticed that the gifts she bought our husbands were more thoughtful than the gifts she bought us. We had each, in our own marriages, decided that this was simply the temperature of being married to a caraway, and that the temperature had to be accepted. None of us, until much later, had asked whether the temperature was the temperature of the room or the temperature of one specific person sitting in the room. The room had been warm in some places and cold in others. The cold places had been wherever the three of us happened to be standing. The thing Patrice said to me on my wedding day was this. She had adjusted my veil. She had stepped back. She had looked at me in the mirror over my shoulder. She had said, in a low voice nobody else could hear, "Brynn, dear, you are going to be very, very lucky. Just remember, the Caraways take care of their own." I had heard that sentence the way a bride hears almost everything on her wedding day, through a kind of soft, dreaming filter. I had nodded. I had said, "Thank you, Patrice." I had not heard what she had been telling me. I had thought she was saying, "You are part of the family now." She had been saying something else. She had been saying, "This family has its own rules. Those rules will not always include you. I will be the one enforcing them. I want you to know that going in." I had not understood. I had been 28. I had been in a white dress. I had been about to walk down an aisle to a man I loved. I had not been listening for warnings. I should have been. I would have heard her. We have 2 children, a daughter named Audley, who is 13, and a son named Briggs, who is 10. They are good children. They love their grandmother. They have spent 13 years and 10 years, respectively, being told by their grandmother that they are special, and that their grandmother loves them in a particular way, and that the Caraways take care of their own. I am not, I want to be clear, ever going to keep my children from their grandmother. That is not the kind of mother I am, and it is not the kind of grandmother she has been to them, regardless of what she has done to me. The grandmother she has been to my children has been a good grandmother. The mother-in-law she has been to me has been something else. The marriage was good for the first 10 years, or I thought it was good. Holden was a serious man. He was a careful man. He worked long hours at the company. He came home for dinner. He read the kids stories. He took us to the lake every summer for 2 weeks in August. He was not exactly an affectionate man, but I had been raised by a father who was not affectionate either, and I had not expected affection in the loud, demonstrative way that some women have it. I had expected what I had gotten: a steady man who provided, a man who showed up, a man who did not yell or drink or cheat as far as I knew, and as far as I would have been able to tell. The cracks started in 2018, the year his father had been gone 4 years, and the company had started to do better than it had been doing under his father's later years. Holden became, somewhere in 2018, a man who was always at the office, who took phone calls in the garage, who had begun to talk about money in ways he had not talked about it before. He had begun to use the phrase tax planning the way some men use the phrase, I have a headache. He used it to end conversations, used it when I asked about our joint accounts. He used it when I asked about the company. I had not pushed. I had been raised by my own father not to push. My father had been an accountant. He had been a quiet man. He had told me when I was 22 that the most important thing a woman could learn was when to let a man think he was in charge. I had listened to him my whole life. I had let Holden think he was in charge. I had not, until 2024, understood what that had cost me. The thing that finally tipped me off was, like most things, small. It was a Christmas card. It was the Christmas of 2023. Patrice had sent her annual Christmas card, which she had always done with the family photos arranged in a small collage with a printed message. The 2023 card had been like all the others, with one small difference. At the bottom of the printed message, in Patrice's careful, cursive handwriting, she had added one line. Thank you, Holden, for everything you do for this family. Your father would be so proud. That line was not addressed to me. I had not been mentioned. The card had been signed, Love, Mom. I had read the card at my kitchen counter on December 15th. I had set it down. I had thought, in the small, clear way I sometimes thought things, she has not mentioned me by name in a Christmas card in 3 years. I have not noticed until now. I had gone back and looked at the 2022 card. She had not mentioned me. I had gone back and looked at the 2021 card. She had not mentioned me. I had pulled out the 2020 card, mentioned the 2019, mentioned the 2018, mentioned sometime between 2020 and 2021, my mother-in-law had stopped writing my name on the family Christmas card. I had not noticed because I had not been looking. I had been wrapping presents. I had been making cookies. I had been the wife. The wife had not had time to read her own absence in the cards. I want to pause here for a second. Some of you listening to this are going to know exactly what I am describing. The small thing. The thing you almost missed. The thing that, once you saw it, you could not unsee. If this is hitting close, drop a comment. Subscribe if you have not. We are not at the part that turned yet. We are getting there. I started paying attention in January of 2024. I want to be specific about what paying attention looks like because I think a lot of women in the situation I was in do not know how to begin. Paying attention is small. paying attention does not look like anything. Paying attention is going to the bookshelf in your living room and pulling down the financial statements for your joint accounts and reading them carefully for the first time in years. Paying attention is asking, casually at dinner, what the company's revenue had been the previous year, and noticing that your husband answers with a number that is somehow always slightly vague. Paying attention is logging into the joint credit card account on the laptop while your husband is at work and writing down on a piece of paper that you fold into your wallet and tear up later the names of the charges you do not recognize. Paying attention when you have not been paying it for 16 years is a slow thing. It is a thing you do quietly while you are still making dinner and packing the kids' lunches and going to the grocery store. It is a thing you do without anyone knowing you're doing it. Holden did not know I had started paying attention. Patrice did not know I had started paying attention. They had been counting on me to keep being the wife who did not notice. I had been her for 16 years. I was very, very good at being her. I was so good at her that they had not noticed when I had stopped being her in January of 2024. They had thought she was still in the kitchen. She had not been in the kitchen since the Christmas card. She had been in the living room with a notebook. By April, I had a folder. The folder had 14 pages of notes. I had noticed that a quarterly dividend payment from the company, which I knew should have been deposited to our joint account, was not appearing. I had noticed that Holden's salary, which should have been roughly the same as the previous year, was somehow $40,000 lower on the deposit side, but unchanged in his pay stubs. I had noticed 3 transfers over the previous 18 months from our joint savings account to an account I did not recognize for amounts ending in $87,000, $112,000, and $43,000. I had noticed that Patrice in the last 18 months had given the kids more expensive gifts than usual. A trip to Disney World in 2023, a computer for Audley in 2024, riding lessons for Briggs at a stable that, I had quietly looked up, cost $480 a month. I had noticed that Patrice had started saying things lightly in passing when she came over for Sunday dinners, like, "Holden, sweetheart, when you stop by the house tomorrow, can you bring the papers from the den? The ones in the blue folder." Papers. The blue folder. I had never asked. Holden had always nodded. He had always brought the papers in a leather satchel I had not asked about to dinner at his mother's house, and he had always come home without the satchel. I had noticed. I had not said anything. I had written it in my notebook. The notebook had become, by April, an architecture. I want to tell you about one specific evening because it changed something in me. It was the second Sunday in March of 2024. Patrice had come over for dinner. I had made a roast. She had been sitting at the dining room table with Holden and the kids, holding court the way she always did, telling a story about a fundraiser at the Historical Society that had not been managed properly. She had been a charming storyteller. The kids had been laughing. Holden had been laughing. I had been at the head of the table, the host, the wife, the mother, the daughter-in-law, the manager. I had been listening. I had been listening in a way I had not listened in 16 years. And I had heard, in the middle of one of Patrice's sentences, her say, "Of course, Holden has always understood. The business has always come first. That's the Caraway way." She had said it lightly. She had said it in passing. She had said it as a complete throwaway. I had heard it. I had heard in those 11 words the entire architecture of my marriage. The business had always come first. That was the Caraway way. I had not, I realized that night, ever come first in 16 years. I had come second to the business. I had come second to Patrice. I had come second to a way of being that had been decided long before I had walked down the aisle in 2008. I had finished the meal. I had cleared the table. I had washed the dishes. I had said goodnight to my mother-in-law at the door at 9:14. I had gone upstairs. I had sat at the desk in my office. I had opened my notebook. I had written in careful letters the words, "The business has always come first." I had drawn a small box around them. I had not cried. I had just written. I had been writing things down for 3 months by then. The writing had become, in its own quiet way, the work of becoming someone who was paying attention. I called my friend Marjorie Whitfield in April. Marjorie was a divorce attorney in our county. She was 71 years old, semi-retired, and I had met her at a fundraiser for the Historical Society 3 years earlier. She had given me her card. She had said, "Brynn, you probably will never need this, but just in case." I had taken the card. I had put it in my wallet. I had carried it around for 3 years. In April of 2024, I called the number. Marjorie answered. I said, "Marjorie, this is Brynn Caraway. We met at the Historical Society fundraiser. You gave me your card 3 years ago." She said, "Brynn, I remember you. Are you all right?" I said, "Marjorie, I think I need your help. I do not want to file for divorce. Not yet. I want to know what is going on first. Is that something you can help me with?" She said, "Brynn, yes, that is exactly what I help with. Come to my office on Friday. Bring whatever you have." I went to Marjorie's office on Friday. I brought the folder. She read it. She did not say anything for a long minute. Then she said, "Brynn, I want to retain a forensic accountant. Her name is Petra Voigt. She is the best in this region. She has worked with me for 22 years. She will go through every financial document we can legally access. She will tell us what we are actually looking at. The cost will be approximately $18,000. I want to be honest about that. Can you afford that?" I said, "Marjorie, I have a savings account in my own name that my grandmother left me. There is enough." She said, "Good. We are going to use it. We are going to find out what is happening before we make any other decisions. Brynn, one more thing. I said, yes. She said, do not tell your husband. Do not tell anyone, especially not your mother-in-law. Is that clear? I said, yes. She said, good. Petra Voigt called me 3 months later, in November. The call came at 4:17 on a Tuesday afternoon. I was wrapping leftover chicken. I went to her office the next morning at 9. Lucinda, who was Marjorie's associate and who had been managing the case under Marjorie's oversight, was already there. Petra had a large conference table with 3 monitors arranged on it. The monitors showed spreadsheets. The spreadsheets had hundreds of rows. Petra was 58 years old. She had short gray hair. She wore reading glasses on a chain. She poured me a cup of tea. She said, Brynn, sit down. I am going to walk you through what I have found. It is going to take a few hours. Please ask questions when you have them. I am going to start at the beginning. She started at the beginning. She walked me through it. The picture was uglier than I had imagined. It was not just the diverted salary. It was not just the missing dividends. It was a 5-year pattern. Starting in 2019, the year after Holden's father had been gone 5 years and Holden had inherited operational control of the company, Holden had been transferring funds out of the marital estate into accounts controlled by his mother. The legal structure he had used was a Family Wealth Preservation Entity, an LLC called Caraway Family Holdings, which had been formed in Delaware in 2019 with Patrice as the sole listed managing member. The LLC was, on paper, a family asset protection vehicle. In practice, it had been a place where Holden had been quietly moving money he did not want to be part of the marital estate. Some of the transfers have been disguised as company distributions to Patrice as a 40% shareholder. Some had been disguised as gifts. Some had been disguised as repayments of loans Patrice had supposedly made to Holden, but for which there was no documentation. The total amount that had been moved out of the marital estate and into Caraway Family Holdings over the 5-year period was, by Petra's careful accounting, $447,213. Of that, approximately $63,000 had been spent on the kids' gifts and trips in what Petra called consumption laundering, where money taken from the marital estate is returned to the family in a form that benefits the children but appears to be the mother-in-law's generosity. The remaining $384,000 was sitting in Caraway Family Holdings, controlled by Patrice, available to Holden through a series of mechanisms that, Petra said, would not survive scrutiny in a divorce proceeding if a competent attorney went looking for them. Petra finished walking me through the documents at 11:47 a.m. She set down her pen. She took off her reading glasses. She looked at me. She said, Brynn, I want to say something. I have been doing this for 25 years. I have seen a lot of cases. What your husband and your mother-in-law have done is not unusual in family-controlled businesses. It is, however, illegal. It constitutes marital fraud. It also implicates your mother-in-law, who is not a party to the marriage, but who has been a participant in a financial scheme that defrauded a member of her own family. We have in this folder the documentation. Marjorie and Lucinda are going to advise you on what to do with it. I want you to know one thing before you decide. The documentation is airtight. Whatever you decide to do with it, you can do with full confidence that the underlying facts are not in dispute. Do you have any questions for me? I said, Petra, one question. She said, yes. I said, did Patrice know what she was doing? Petra did not hesitate. She said, Brynn, she has been the sole managing member of an LLC for 5 years. She has signed quarterly tax filings. She has signed an annual statement of beneficial ownership. She has personally received and deposited multiple wire transfers from her son's accounts into the LLC. Whether she understood every technical aspect of the scheme is unknowable. Whether she understood that she was holding money for her son that was supposed to be part of his marital estate is not unknowable. She knew. I sat with that. I said, thank you, Petra. Marjorie, Lucinda, and I went to a small Italian restaurant down the street for lunch. We ordered 3 salads. I did not eat mine. Marjorie did not push me to. She said, Brynn, tell me how you want to proceed. There is no wrong answer. I said, Marjorie, I want to file. I want to file this week. I want everything in the petition. I want the LLC named. I want Patrice named as a participant in the marital fraud. I want a court order to freeze the LLC pending discovery. I want every dollar back. I do not care how long it takes. Marjorie nodded. She said, Brynn, good. We will file Monday. I want to ask you something. The children. I said, Patrice will continue to be their grandmother. I will not interfere with that. Whatever is decided in the court, that is between Patrice and me as adults. The children stay out of it. Patrice does not, under any circumstances, hear anything about this from them. I am going to tell Holden myself on Sunday night after the kids are in bed. I will tell him calmly. I will tell him what I know. I will tell him that he has 48 hours to retain counsel. Then we file Monday. If you have ever sat at a restaurant booth with a salad in front of you that you could not eat and known that the next 11 months of your life were going to be a fight you had no choice but to win, then you know what that lunch felt like. If this is hitting close, drop a comment, subscribe if you have not. We are at the part that turned. I told Holden on Sunday night the way I said I would. The kids were in bed. We were in the kitchen. He had been having a glass of bourbon. I had been making tea. I said, Holden, sit down. I need to tell you something. He sat down. He looked at me. He had no idea what was coming. I had been performing the role of the wife who did not notice for so long that he had not been watching me at all. I said, Holden, I have retained an attorney. I have hired a forensic accountant. I have a folder of documentation, 47 pages long, that establishes that you have been moving funds from our marital estate into Caraway Family Holdings, the LLC controlled by your mother, for 5 years. The total amount moved is approximately $447,000. I am filing for divorce on Monday morning. I am naming the LLC and your mother in the filing as participants in marital fraud. You have 48 hours to retain counsel of your own. Please move your things to the guest room tonight. I do not want to have any further conversations with you about this without our attorneys present. Holden stared at me. He did not say anything for a long minute. Then he said, "Brynn, we can work this out. We do not need attorneys." I said, "Holden, the time for working it out without attorneys was 5 years ago, before you started moving money out of our accounts. The time for working it out without attorneys has passed." He said, "Brynn, my mother, she does not know what she is doing. She is 76. She is just signing what I bring her." I said, "Holden, your mother is 76 years old. Your mother has been on the board of a regional hospital for 18 years. Your mother chairs the finance committee of the Historical Society. Your mother knows what she has been signing. Do not insult her by suggesting otherwise. And do not insult me." He said, "Brynn, please." I said, "Holden, move your things to the guest room now." He moved his things to the guest room. He left for his mother's house the next morning at 6 a.m. I imagined to coordinate. I do not know what they discussed. I imagine it was not a pleasant conversation. Marjorie's office filed the petition at 10 a.m. that Monday. By Tuesday afternoon, Caraway Family Holdings had been frozen by court order. By Wednesday, Patrice had retained an attorney of her own. Patrice, it turned out, had not been prepared to fight. She had been prepared to be on the Historical Society board for the rest of her life. She had been prepared to be the kind of grandmother who arrived at Christmas with monogrammed presents. She had not been prepared to be deposed under oath about the management of an LLC, or to have her quarterly tax filings reviewed by a forensic accountant, or to have her face appear in a court filing under the heading of marital fraud co-conspirator. Her attorney, a man named Whitcomb Mears, who specialized in elder law and not in financial fraud, advised her within 2 weeks of taking the case to settle. The settlement she reached, separately from Holden, returned $384,000 to the marital estate from the LLC. The remaining $63,000 that had been spent on the kids' gifts and trips was, by mutual agreements, allowed to stand as having been gifts to the grandchildren and not part of the marital estate, which was a concession Marjorie had decided was reasonable, given that returning that money would have been impossible without going after the kids' computers and writing lessons, which I had not wanted to do. Holden's settlement was longer and more contentious. It took 11 months. He fought every line. By the end, he had agreed to a division of the marital estate that gave me the family home, half of his shares in the company, which would be bought out by his mother's estate at a court-determined value, full custody of Audley and Briggs, with him having alternating weekends, and ongoing child support that reflected his full historical compensation. The total settlement value to me was approximately $1.4 million, plus the house and the ongoing support. Marjorie, when she had handed me the final paperwork, had said, "Brynn, you have your life back. That is what this paperwork says." I had said, "Marjorie, thank you." She had said, "Brynn, I want to say one more thing. You did the hardest part. You paid attention. That was the thing nobody could do for you. The rest of this was just paperwork. Do you understand?" I had said, "Yes." Patrice and I did not speak for 9 months. The first time I saw her again was at Briggs' piano recital in June. She had been sitting in the back row. I had walked in with Audley. We had sat in the front. I had not turned around. After the recital in the parking lot, Patrice had come over to where I had been standing with the kids. She had said, "Briggs, sweetheart, you were wonderful." She had hugged him. She had hugged Audley. She had not looked at me. She had been about to walk away when she had stopped. She had turned around. She had said in a low voice the kids could not hear, "Brynn, I am sorry." I had looked at her. I had said, "Patrice, thank you for saying that. I am not ready to have a longer conversation. The children will be at your house for Easter as planned. We will figure out the rest as we go." She had nodded. She had walked to her car. I had watched her drive away. I had not felt triumphant. I had not felt vindictive. I had felt, for the first time in 16 years, that I was standing in a parking lot as a fully sized version of myself. Patrice had been the one who had looked smaller. She had been smaller. She had always been smaller. She had just spent 16 years arranging the lighting so that I would not be able to tell. There is one more piece of this story I want to tell you, because it surprised me, and because I think it might surprise some of you. Felicity called me 2 weeks after the petition was filed. Felicity, the oldest daughter-in-law. We had not been close in the 16 years I had been a Caraway. I had assumed that Felicity was in some way on Patrice's side, because Felicity had been there the longest and had always seemed to me to have figured out the rules of the family in a way I had not. Felicity called me on a Thursday afternoon. She said, "Brynn, Sutton told me what happened. I want to come over. I want to bring wine. May I?" I said, "Felicity, yes." She came over that evening. She brought 2 bottles of wine, a tin of cookies from a bakery I had never been to, and a story I had not been expecting. She sat at my kitchen counter for 3 hours. She told me that Sutton had also, she had recently discovered, been moving money into Caraway family holdings. Smaller amounts than Holden, around $90,000 over 5 years. Sutton had told her about it when the petition had landed and Patrice had called him in a panic. Sutton had confessed everything in a single tearful evening. Felicity had been deciding what to do for 2 weeks. She wanted to know what I thought. I sat with that. I said, Felicity, I cannot tell you what to do. What I can tell you is what I did. I called an attorney. I hired a forensic accountant. I paid attention. Then I made a decision based on what I found. That is the path I walked. Yours might be a different path. I will support whatever you decide. Felicity nodded. She drank her wine. She said, Brynn, I am sorry I have not been a better sister to you for 16 years. I think I was afraid that if I got too close to you, Patrice would notice. I think I have been afraid of her in ways I have not let myself examine. I want to apologize. I said, Felicity, thank you. You do not need to apologize. We were both navigating the same room. We were just doing it in different corners. She had hugged me at the door. She had said, whatever I decide to do, I want us to be friends, not caraway sisters-in-law, just friends. I had said, Felicity, yes, I want that too. Felicity decided eventually to confront Sutton and to renegotiate the financial terms of their marriage without filing for divorce. They went into counseling. Sutton returned the funds to their joint accounts. Patrice was, by all accounts, devastated to lose the smaller piece of her arrangement with her second son, but she was not in a position to fight it. Wren, the youngest daughter-in-law, I learned later through Felicity, had been quietly preparing her own exit for 2 years, separately, without knowing what I was doing. Wren filed for divorce 4 months after I did. The Caraway family, as it had stood for 16 years, was no longer the family it had been. The mother-in-law who had spent decades enforcing rules at the center of it was, in the end, the architect of its dismantling. She had not meant to be. She had not been able to imagine, in 16 years of sitting at the head of the table at Sunday dinners, that the 3 women she had been managing might, one by one, decide to manage themselves instead. Holden moved into a small house 6 miles away. He has the kids every other weekend. He has been, by every account from the kids, an attentive father since the divorce. He has been to therapy. He has, I am told by Audley, who reports these things to me in the careful way 13-year-olds report on their fathers, started cooking actual meals on his weekends. The kids like the meals. I am glad. I do not need him to be a better father than he was. I only need him not to be a worse one. He has not been a worse one. The therapy seems to be helping. A year and 4 months after the petition was filed, this is what has changed. I have moved my things into the spare room I had been using as a half-hearted office. I have made it a real office. I have started a small consulting practice helping nonprofit boards review their financial controls. I had been a financial analyst before I had Audley. I had let the credential lapse. I had renewed it last year while the divorce was being negotiated. I have, in 8 months, taken on 6 clients. The work has been good. The work has reminded me that I was a person before I was a wife, and that the person I was before I was a wife had been competent and curious and good at hard things. She had been good at hard things. She had only forgotten she was. She has been remembering. She is going to keep remembering. The remembering is the work. I have started having Felicity over for lunch on Thursdays. We have, in the last 6 months, become the friends we should have been for 16 years. She has been telling me things about her marriage I would not have heard had Patrice not done what she did. I have been telling her things about mine. We have been, in our way, the 2 oldest daughters-in-law trying to figure out what we want the rest of our lives to look like, with the small benefit of knowing each other now. She brings sourdough bread she has been baking since the lockdown of 2020. I make a soup. We eat at the kitchen island. The Thursdays have become, in the last 6 months, one of the things I look forward to most. I had not had a friend like Felicity in 16 years. I had not, until now, understood that I had been allowed to. Wren calls me too, twice a month. Wren is going through her own settlement with Beckett. Her case is more complicated than mine was because she did not have my notebook. She is building hers now. I gave her Petra's number. I gave her Marjorie's number. I told her on a Sunday night in February the same thing Felicity had told me. Whatever you decide to do, I will support it. There is no rush. The patient women are the ones who win. Wren is being patient. It is going to take her another year. She is going to be all right. The cardinal that visits my back porch came on the morning after Patrice and I spoke in the parking lot. I had not seen a cardinal in our yard for years. I do not know if Patrice's apology had anything to do with it. I do not really believe in that sort of thing. I do, however, believe in pattern recognition. I had been the wife who paid attention. The cardinal had been the kind of small notice detail that paying attention women collect. He has been back many times since. He brings a female sometimes. I leave seed on the railing. They take what they want. They fly off. They come back. They do not have to explain themselves to me. I do not have to explain myself to them. We have a quiet arrangement. It is the kind of arrangement I have learned, late, to want. Ottilie and Briggs are doing well. Ottilie is in 8th grade. She wants to be a veterinarian. Briggs is in 5th grade. He has started competitive swimming. He goes to practice 4 mornings a week at 6 a.m. I drive him. He sleeps in the car on the way there. He sleeps in the car on the way home from school. He is growing. He is eating a tremendous amount of food. I have not, in 16 years, been the kind of person who knew what I was good at, separate from what I was being needed for. I am learning. I am, this morning, sitting at the kitchen island where the foil from the chicken was on the Tuesday Petra called, and I am writing this account. I am 44. I have a long time. I have a quiet kitchen. I have a cardinal on the porch. I have a folder of consulting clients and a calendar with my own appointments in it. I have, finally, my own name back. It had been there the whole time. I had only stopped saying it out loud. I have started writing my own name on Christmas cards now. I sent 47 cards last December, my first holiday in the new life. I signed every single one with my own first name first. Brynn and the kids. Not the Caraway family. Not Mrs. Holden Caraway. Brynn. I had not done that in 16 years. I had let myself become a unit in someone else's grammar. It had been a small grammatical decision that had reflected a much larger life one. The new cards arrived in 47 houses in December. 2 of those houses wrote back. One was Felicity. The other was a woman I had worked with 18 years ago before Audley was born, who had not heard from me in years, and who wrote on a card with a robin on the front, "Brynn, I have missed you. I am so glad to hear from you. Call me." I called her. We had lunch the next week. She has become, in the 4 months since, another friend. The friends are returning. They have been waiting. They have been waiting the whole time. If you made it this far, I want to ask you something. Have you ever had a mother-in-law who you spent decades thinking was on your side and discovered late that she had been on someone else's the entire time? Drop a comment. Tell me what you noticed first. Tell me about the Christmas card, or the gift that was a little too generous, or the phrase she used about your husband that suggested a closeness you had not been invited to. The small details, the ones that looking back, you cannot believe you did not see. I read every comment. I mean that. I want to leave you with one thing because I think it matters. The patient women who notice are the ones who win these cases. Not because the patient women are smarter, not because they are stronger, because the patient women are willing to write things down. They are willing to keep a notebook. They are willing to spend 3 months gathering 14 pages of small details before they make one phone call. The men who do what Holden did, and the mothers who help them, do it because they have decided that their wives and daughters-in-law are not paying attention. The single most powerful thing you can do if you are in a marriage like the one I had is to start paying attention. Quietly, without telling anyone, with a notebook. The notebook is the work. The notebook is what changes everything. The notebook is what brought me to a forensic accountant's office on a Wednesday morning in November. The notebook is what is going to bring you, if you need it, to your own. If you know someone who is married to a man whose mother might be doing what Patrice was doing, share this with them. There are more stories like this on this channel. The link is in the description. Thank you for being here. I will see you in the next one. I mean that too.